Welcome to my audiobook. So, I am going to be releasing the first 3 chapters of my witchy book, my latest one, The Death Journey, here on YouTube. Afterwards, it is going to be released weekly on my Patreon. Without further ado, let us jump in to Chapter 1 of The Death Journey. The Death Journey, A Witch's Practical Guide to Death by Raven Wells. Copyright 2023, Raven Wells. All rights reserved. No portion of this work may be sold, scanned, or transmitted in any form without written permission from the author. Dedication. My mom, my biggest supporter. Chapter 1. Why this book? There are plenty of books on the market discussing death, and only a few with the perspective of Wiccan, pagan, or witchcraft in mind. However, the problem I have found with the limited resources we have on this topic, not everyone wants to be a death doula. What is a death doula? Quickly put, this is the person who helps the dying transition from this life to whatever awaits on the other side. Typically, this will be the person who is laying flowers around the dying, anointing the body, singing or chanting, and possibly doing meditations with the person as they die. The death doula or death priest or priestess will be the one leading the funeral rites, though it is not likely to be this person who arranges everything. They will arrive at the funeral to say the final words and bless a gravesite. The decisions involving which casket to use, what headstone should be placed, what cemetery, and so on will fall legally onto the executor or next of kin. The death doula is there for comforting the dying and helping spiritually with the final steps of life. While, yes, being a death doula or a death priest or priestess is a wonderful journey that many end up taking, it isn't for everyone. And for those people, there is very little written. You end up piecing together various bits of information to Frankenstein some idea of what you will need when handling a death. Unfortunately, even the majority of books on the topic of Wicca, paganism, and witchcraft only have brief sections on death. And more often than not, it is merely the theory of what happens to you after you die. While this is important, that is only a small part of what you will need when the death occurs. In the span of a decade, I have experienced a number of deaths in my family. With each one, I would turn to the books I had found on the topic, looking for things like funeral rites, ways to bring witchcraft into all decisions, such as options for what happens to the body or blessing the gravesite. But there was little to no information on this. Often, I found myself with only discussions on reincarnation and the Summerland. In 2019, I decided to try writing down some of my rituals. In an earlier version of this book you now listen to, I had the intention to only include funeral rituals. However, as time has gone by, my journey with death has deepened with more people gone from my life. In the autumn of 2022, after yet another funeral and viewing, I had a conversation with a member of my family and quickly learned how little they knew about the death process. Perhaps, over time, I had taken for granted my morbid curiosity. Since I was young, I was off reading about hearses and wandering through cemeteries. Not everyone does this. I explained what I could to this family member throughout the viewing time as we stood around. The gears in my mind were turning the whole time. Why didn't I write down all the practical stuff that goes along with death in my book? That month, I began the first draft of this book. It has gone through a number of changes, but the premise remains the same. I want this book to be a helpful, practical guide for those in the Wicca, witchcraft, and pagan communities. While contemplating our own deaths and what possibly happens will be a part of this book, my intention is that this book will be useful for all aspects of handling death. A quick but necessary disclaimer is to remind you that I am not a licensed therapist or a grief counselor. The information in this book is a practical guide through the death journey. The information included is based upon the laws and regulations of the United States. This may differ from place to place around the world. While there are a few sections on handling grief, there is always a limit to what a book can do to help through this part of the death journey. If you find yourself struggling as you cope with the death of a loved one, please seek out professional help. There are many resources available to you during this time. Spirituality can help to some degree. Do not assume it will always be enough. Oftentimes, your local funeral director will have a number of recommended grief counselors. In using this book, the sections within are designed to go through the death journey. The problem you may find is that nothing fits perfectly into that box. You may have picked this book up after your loved one has already died. If so, find the areas that are necessary for you. I have decided to write this as if you received news that a loved one will be dying. There are steps that are best taken while the person is still alive and conscious. As this book goes along, it will offer you real-world steps alongside rituals to help you cope. Throughout this book, I will be referring to spirituality as witchcraft, though this will likely apply to a majority of Wiccan and pagan beliefs. I have opted to use witchcraft as the main term because that is the title I use in my own life. I do not recommend this be your first book on witchcraft. While I will explain the rituals and ingredients, there must be an underlying knowledge for the context in which these will take place. Thrown into the midst of grief and loss is not the time to take on the practice of witchcraft for the first time. That said, death can be utterly exhausting. For each ritual included throughout this book, I have tried to incorporate varying levels of energy. Many people have told me they wished witchcraft books included options for the chronically ill. I have done my best to have simple but still powerful options alongside the rather large rituals. I've also kept in mind that some people are not as out of the broom closet, so to speak, and want discreet options as well. Throughout this book, my hope is that you will find one that works for you. During the death journey, it can be incredibly difficult to find extra energy. Death is exhausting. You will be faced with many emotions, decisions, and typically some unfortunate drama. Death brings out the worst in people. I hope this book can give you some guidance during this time. And that is it for Chapter 1. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to my first chapter of The Death Journey. This is my witchcraft death book, obviously, if you listen to it, duh. But this is Chapter 1. Chapter 2 and 3 will be coming later this week, and afterwards the rest of the book will be coming out weekly. The plan is every Thursday on my Patreon, so if you'd like to check that out, it is always linked down below. If you would like to get a physical copy of this book, it is now available. It is available in ebook, paperback, and hardback, whichever format suits your fancy, or if you want to keep coming along for the audio version, that will be hosted on Patreon. As always, to my patrons and for my viewers, thank you for listening to this first chapter. I will see you all next time. Blessed be.